Shana Tova. I want to begin with a story. A little girl comes home from Hebrew school, eager to show her mother a drawing. Her mother's standing at the sink washing dishes. "Mommy, guess what?" she squeals, waving the drawing in her hand. Without looking up, the mother responds, "What?" "Guess what?" repeats the little girl. Again, the mother asks, "What?" "Mommy, you're not listening." Still not shifting her focus from the dishes, she says, "Sweetie, yes, I am. But Mommy, you're not listening with your eyes." My message for you on this new year is simple. We are failing in the art of listening. We are so engrossed in our labors, so head down, so task-oriented, that we're not only forgotten to listen with our eyes, we fail to open our ears as well. Our community, our congregation, our families, this very sanctuary is filled with souls that yearn to be heard. Stories that speak about who we are and how much we have in common. But we can't find anyone to listen. In this new year, we must heed the one commandment that everyone in this room knows by heart. Shema Yisrael. Our tradition translates that as "Hear, O Israel," but its root meaning is not to hear. Rather, the higher value, the greater mitzvah. We are commanded to listen. Shema appears again as the first word on the scroll of the mezuzah. This commandment is so important that we are commanded to listen every time we walk into our home and we walk out of our gate, when we lie down and when we rise up. What could be more important than what you nail to the doorpost of your house but the commandment to listen? Hearing simply happens. Listening, however, is a conscious choice. Listening requires concentration so that your brain processes meaning. Listening leads to understanding. Listening requires not only your ears, but your eyes, your heart, and your mind. Indeed, lishma nefesh, we could say in Hebrew. We listen with our entire soul, our whole being. Most people are not hard of hearing. Rather, they are hard of listening. How about you? Are you hard of listening? I know I can be. This morning, we read the disturbing story of Abraham and his attempted sacrifice of his son Isaac. Every year we read it, and every year I am struck by the power of the commandment from God and the acquiescence of Abraham to abide by God's wishes. But what, and this is not impossible, what if it was all just a misunderstanding? A misunderstanding by Abraham that God did not really want Abraham to sacrifice his son. Abraham just wasn't listening in that moment. He got it wrong. God said, "Abraham." "Hineni," here I am, Abraham responds. "Take your son. Take now your son that you love, your only son, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and Baalehu. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering." But the Hebrew word could be translated differently, because the Hebrew word for sacrifice, Baalehu, has the same letters as the idea to raise him up, like an aliyah. And so maybe, just maybe, God simply meant bring Isaac up the mountain. Maybe God wanted him to raise him up, raise him high like Simba in The Lion King in that moment where they pronounce the air. Elton John singing "Circle of Life" in the background. It's a circle of... Could have been. Rashi, the great medieval Torah commentator, reads it that same way, without the Elton John Circle of Life Lion King reference. He adds that in the next moment, God says, now bring him down. Perhaps, just perhaps, when Abraham said, Naini, he was like that mom washing dishes. He heard God, he heard what God said, but he wasn't listening. Another example that Abraham wasn't listening, and maybe even more to the point, was when Abraham was actually about to sacrifice Isaac. Knife raised, ready to do the unthinkable. The angel of God calls out twice to Abraham. You heard Joel chant it. Avraham, Avraham. And again, Abraham says, Naini, here I am. Literally, for God's sake, the angel is saying, do not do it, cries out the angel. But why does the angel have to say Abraham's name twice? Was Abraham not listening? Dan, I know that when somebody calls out my name twice, I have failed in the art of listening. When Abraham said, Naini, here I am, he wasn't really there. Do you say, Naini, here I am, when your mind is really somewhere else? When your children are talking or on the internet? When your spouse is talking and you're watching TV, or you're on your phone while somebody's talking to you? Ashampti. I have done that. Have you? Listening is about being present, being in the room. While there, we have to be fully present. You listen with your whole being. A student was visiting the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And as the great scholar of Jewish thought in that moment got word that a friend's sister had just died, Heschel announced, we have to go. And so they got up and they drove to Boston. It was an hour away. And they went to the house. Heschel walked in. He hugged his friend. He sat on the sofa for an hour. He didn't mumble a single word. Not one cliche, not how old was she, not time will heal, not even I know how you feel. He just sat there in silence for an hour and listened. And when his friend was done talking and telling stories and crying and remembering, Heschel got up, he hugged his friend, and they left. On the ride back, the student asked Rabbi Heschel, did you know her well? This sister of your friend who died? Heschel responded, I'd never met her. The student was puzzled, and so he asked again, but then Rabbi Heschel, why did we drive an hour to just sit on a sofa in silence? The great rabbi responded, because that's what he needed. He needed me to listen. Can we be like Heschel? Can we be a community, a congregation that shows up for each other and just listens? The Talmud explains the commandment to hear the sound of the shofar. Our rabbis teach that if a person blows a shofar in a well, in a deep hole, those who hear it do not fulfill the commandment of hearing the shofar. Because outside of that hole, outside of that pit, you're not able to distinguish between the actual sound of the shofar and the echo of its call. To truly listen, you have to be present, not only emotionally, but physically present. In the words of Brian Stevenson, you have to be proximate. You have to be there. Stevenson is the founder of the Equal Justice Project in the United States. He explains that when we get close, we hear things that we can't hear from afar. We see things that we can't see from afar. And sometimes that makes the difference between acting justly and unjustly. It's all about being proximate. It's being in the presence of the other, not the echo. If you are not proximate, you might hear only the echo. That's why Heschel had to go to his friend. He had to be in his presence so as not to be misguided or confused by the echo of his sadness. He had to confront it panim al panim, face to face, ear to ear. Listening isn't knowing answers. Acknowledging another human being is not about giving advice. It's about giving your attention. You ever hear a magician say abracadabra? Ever heard that before? You know, it's Aramaic. It's an Aramaic word that means I create as I speak. People's words are the most personal creations that we have, coming straight from their minds and going directly into the listener's ears, yearning to find a home in our heart, in our soul. When one truly listens, he or she gives more than can be imagined, for the listener holds sacred a piece of that speaker's soul. What an honor it is to listen, to be in the presence of another and hear their story. A 19th century Hasidic rabbi once said, "Human beings are God's language. The way we speak says something about us, but the way that we listen says everything about us." Rabbi Harold Kushner added, "When we call out to God in our distress, God answers us by sending us by sending us people. Any path is easier to travel when you have someone's hand to hold. Can you imagine putting out your hand for help and no one takes it? I asked you to take your talitot and put them around those around you. Some weren't included. Imagine that feeling. And some were included, surprising to themselves. Imagine that feeling. Can you recall a time when you really needed to talk, but everyone was busy? All you needed was the presence of a trusted friend, a lover, a parent, or a colleague, but they weren't there, or far worse, they were there, but they weren't really there. They weren't fully present, just an empty shell, going through the motions. We all have limitations, but something each one of us is uniquely empowered to do is to be a friend, to be a healing force, to just be present. Woody Allen said 98% of life is just showing up. Just showing up. Naini, here I am. Hinenu, here we are. And so, Temple Sholom, in this new year, I want to challenge us to show up for each other. I want to challenge us to say, Naini, here I am, to show up and listen for and to each other. When Rosh Hashanah ends, not today, but tomorrow, you're going to get an email from me announcing a listening campaign for our congregation. From Sukkot to Hanukkah, 2.5 months, I want to challenge all of us to listen to each other, to have 500 conversations in our congregation. The email will invite you to sign up just to participate. You don't have to pick a date yet. You don't have to pick a time. You don't have to pick who you're going to do it with. Just say, Hineni, I'll show up. I'll find a time. I'll meet with 10 other people in our congregation at somebody's home, and we'll have a conversation. And in that email, you can sign up to be a facilitator, and we'll train you how to do that, or a scribe, and we'll train you how to do that, or a host, and we'll host it in your home instead of here. Just sign up. Say Hinenu. Say, here I am. So that we can talk and listen to each other and find out what unites us, our Jewish journeys, our congregation, our dreams for our futures together as individuals, as families, and as a community. But the conversations are only the beginning. In this new year, let us commit to being a community like Heschel was a friend, a community that shows up for each other. And you can do this, we can do this, by going to Shiva Minyanim, so that when someone in this room loses a loved one, and it's going to happen to someone in this room, they're not alone. They have the comfort of your presence, of all of our presence. You can sign up on our website to receive an email that lets you know when somebody dies and when the Shiva Minyan is. Will you go to one of those this year, even if you don't know the person? Because you don't know the person, and you need to know them, and they need to know you. Will you say Hineni and sit with them as they tell stories about the most precious people in the world to them? Will you say Hineni? Will you say Hineni? Yes. The response is Hineni. Will you say Hineni? Hineni. We have about 25 B'nai Mitzvah. You saw 35 new families. We have 25 B'nai Mitzvah in this congregation this coming year. Children that will become the next generation of Jews who will join temples and shape and lead communities. Will you say Hineni and commit to attending one of those services, listening to our students learn Torah, listening to them share with you and teach what Torah means to them? Will you say Hineni and show up for that? We're going to work on this. There's a couple more. Will you say Hineni and pledge as you did? That's good, but I haven't asked you yet. But for this one, that's good. Will you say Hineni and pledge as you did last year, just $2, just a toonie, for every bar mitzvah child that stands on this bima, so that we can invest in their Jewish future and their Jewish identity, so that we can send them on the March of the Living for a week in Poland and Israel, so we can anchor their Jewish identity because we know that it is assaulted, and so we can show them we are actively listening and doing something. Will you say Hineni for that? Hineni. There were a few less for that one. It's $2 we're talking. In the new year, will you say Hineni and celebrate Cornelia Oberlander, one of our founding members and true national hero, for her work in creating sustainable living in urban environments? Will you say Hineni, here I am, and show up for her and our community as we celebrate and learn from her and from all that she has done for our environment? Will you say Hineni and show up for that? Hineni. Will you join our caring community that reaches out to the sick and the homebound, our award-winning sisterhood, our rejuvenated men's club, our 60-plus group, our morning minyan, and so many more groups and affiliates in our congregation, and say Hineni, here I am, and get ready to know, to really know, the men and women and families of our congregation, so that no one sits alone in a room filled with 1,000 people, that no one walks into the sanctuary and says, I have no one to sit with. I don't know anybody here, or far worse, no one knows me. Will you say Hineni for that? Hineni. My friends, there is a deep pain in our world, and it's right here in this room as well. It's the pain of isolation. It's the pain of loneliness. We can soften some of that pain. We can show up like Heschel. We can say Hineni like Abraham and listen with intention and empathy. We can become a more caring, a more present community. And so let's return to that mother in her kitchen for a moment with her daughter. The mother's still washing dishes, but now she's listening to her daughter. She puts down her dishes. She lifts up her eyes. She leans down and gets at the same level as her daughter. She gets close to see the creation that is in her hand. The child was saying, abracadabra, I speak through my creations. The mother focused on her words. She listened with her ears and her eyes and her heart and her soul. And all of them inside of her whispered, Hineni, here I am. We too can listen. We too can care. We too can be present. And if you agree with me, say Hineni. Hineni. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will. Amen.